Hi, and welcome to the THC Show with Neil, the show where we try to tell the truth, give you some hope, and find ways to change as we educate, stimulate, and motivate you guys with all that we have on our show. And I'm very pleased today to have on the show a bunch of lawyers, because I think it's important that we talk to lawyers. It's one of the paths that we have to get to the top of the mountain is through the legal system. And very blessed and privileged to have John Conroy and Jack Lloyd on today as our main guests. We again have 8 out of 10 Glenn from Hi Guys and CannaMatch.ca going to help us out with the 420 session. Jerry Martin is here. Actually, he's not here yet, but I'm sure he's going to be here for our Martin Medical Moment. And we're going to be joined on the telephone with Jerry's lawyer, Paul Lewin, from Toronto, and we'll discuss the state of his case and what's going on in our pursuit of access to medical cannabis for the sick and suffering people in Canada. And I start out every show talking about what I'm not happy about, and I'm always not happy about mostly the same things. And that's the state of affairs with our democracy here, with our public servants who really think that they win the lottery when they get elected into power, and that they have power over people and that they're the authorities. And that's not their intended role, and it's not what we want them to be doing. And we've got to somehow get out from underneath this. We've had our democracy co-opted and taken over by the corporate elite over the last number of decades. They were always the ones that were behind our oppressions in the first place. They're the ones that our public servants should really be protecting us from. But unfortunately, they've built loopholes into our system, and they really do have strings attached to our public servants, and they control the levers of power. And that's really obvious when you look at the results of what's going on in our democracy, and I like to call it that because it is dumb here that we are subservient to these people and we're subjects to these people, when really freedom is what is supposed to be at the root of this whole thing that we've got here, and that we are all individual sovereign beings that deserve to have those rights respected and protected by the people that we put into office to do exactly that. That they're there to protect our rights, not to override them at the whim of their masters, which seems to be this corporate elite that still wants to oppress us, just as has been happening for generations upon generations. And the biggest example of that, and the number one topic on this show, is always about the attempt to prohibit cannabis. The other plant medicines fall into that category as well. And so we've been fighting that fight for a long time. It is for sure the most glaring and obvious example of how we as people are not free. A crime is something that happens when somebody knowingly and intentionally commits an act that causes significant damage and harm to somebody else. And here we are living in a world where they're using the criminal law to try to outlaw the production and distribution of cannabis, and even the possession of cannabis has been going on for a long time, although now we've kind of turned that one around. As long as you've got legal cannabis and not illegal cannabis, you're not a criminal anymore in their world. But none of this is right. None of this is really a crime. It's not a crime to grow some plants. It's not a crime to want to make some money. It's not a crime to trade those plants with somebody else who wants to trade them for money. It's not the role of government to impede business and get in the way of commerce. It's their job to facilitate commerce and business. When people and groups of people want to trade amongst themselves, that's not the business of our public servants, unless there's harm arising from the sale or the production or the use of whatever it is that's being sold there. And when that happens, then the government does have a role to play with putting on reasonable regulations to try to protect people from the harms that might arise. And whenever you're putting on regulations, it's a real balancing act between human rights, the right of a sovereign individual human being to have and possess or grow or dispense whatever they want, unless they're actually harming somebody else. So when there's harm being caused, you have to be careful about whatever restrictions and regulations you put on and impose on people, because you're really impeding on their natural human rights. So regulations need to reflect that which is being regulated and really be a response to harms that are happening. And instead, the regulatory bodies traditionally have been taken over pretty early by the corporate groups that they're actually trying to regulate. And the regulations are in a lot of times in favor of those corporate groups and not in favor of the public. So we need public servants that have a spine, that recognize that their job is to protect the rights and the freedoms of all of the individuals, as each one is a sovereign person, that they need to be limited in what legislations they can pass and what they can enforce on people. They need to be transparent in all of the dealings that they have. They're working for us, and we shouldn't be having closed-door meetings with the professional lobbyists going on with our politicians where they're able to threaten and bribe them into getting their way. And obviously there's some of that going on because many of our politicians get into office promising one thing and then doing the opposite. And that's obviously because of the corporate influence and the influence of the financial elite that managed to pull the leaves of power with our politicians. So we need to do something about that. We need to recognize the corruption and how deep it runs in this democracy of ours. We need to recognize and respect the efforts of our forefathers that went to war and fought against dictators and tyrants and those types of people that would enslave us. We need to recognize that there's no one that has any blood that's any better than anybody else. There's nobody that has been, bred by the gods and they have a different blue of blood running through them. There are no real royal people here. There's just people who have taken that mantle and other people have allowed them to do that. And that's fine. They can be royal if they want. They can be dictators if they want. They can militarily take over if they want. But what they cannot do is infringe on the natural rights of any of the individuals that they are now charged with looking after. So laws and regulations that protect the rich and harm the poor and the vulnerable, that don't respond to things that are actually problematic with respect to the things that are being sold, are contrary to what's right in our democracy. And the biggest and most glaring example of that is the attempt to prohibit cannabis and how that went on for all of these decades in the face of it not being a crime in any way, stretch, or form, not being a dangerous drug by any way, stretch, or form, and in fact being a very, very valuable and crucial medical herb for so many people that are afflicted with so many different things. And the now so-called legalization, this fake legalization that we've been given by the powerful elite in answer to our demands for legalization, is nowhere close to what we deserve. It's still a great way to expose exactly how corrupt our system is and how these public servants of ours on behalf of the corporate and financial elite are continuing to oppress us, exploit us, and now they want to monopolize this plant that anybody can grow and that many people need medicinally. And this so-called legalization has resulted in the absolute annihilation of the storefront access to medical cannabis products. This was something that was talked about in the Supreme Court case where the medical users that were able to grow cannabis because of Health Canada regulations were then being told that they were no longer going to be able to grow for themselves. And when that was challenged in the courts and won very handily, the decision that came down by Judge Phelan in that which was called the Allard case was that storefront access to medical cannabis products is at the very heart of access for medical patients and really needs to be there. And so here now we've got a situation where the federal government has disrespected that judgment very greatly by bringing in, by their own definition, what is a non-medical system of cannabis distribution. And the medical patients are the ones that are suffering. Medical patients can still get access if they're able to through online dispensing, through licensed producers licensed by the federal government. But the pricing is outrageous, and they're really leaving all of the poor people behind in this. It seems like they only care about the people that are rich enough to be able to pay the price, to be able to maintain prohibition prices in a non-prohibition world. The price of cannabis is outrageous. It absolutely is an extremely valuable commodity that's probably worth $10 a gram to people because that's what they're willing to pay. And in fact, they're willing to pay more than that in many parts of the world where they don't have access to proper cannabis like we do here. But even here in Vancouver with BC Bud and lots of it, the going price is about $10 a gram that people are willing to pay. which translates into a huge amount of money per pound. And, cannabis is a wonderful commodity, and I'll grant you that. I love cannabis. I love all that it does for so many people. I've seen it be a miraculous cure for people that are severely afflicted with many different medical conditions. And I know how it enlightened me and awakened me spiritually as a young man, and has helped me in my life with many decisions that I've had to make, and has brought calmness and sensibility to situations where otherwise panic was about to set in. So I understand that cannabis is a very valuable commodity, but give me a break. Like $10 for a gram. I like cherries too. They're wonderful on a nice sunny afternoon sitting out on the patio, and I think they're a very valuable commodity too. And they change my mood and make me feel good, and there are probably all kinds of medicinal values to cherries and other fruits that we could imagine as well. But none of those sell for anywhere close to $10 for a whole pound. So it's prohibition prices that we're dealing with, all propped up by a government that wants to monopolize on a marketplace that was in there because of prohibition, a thriving, vibrant marketplace that they not just want to take over, but they want to wipe out and then replace with their own monopoly of corporate weed grown in large-scale factories without the love and the soul that's put into the cannabis that most of us consume through our local dealers and our local growers and the people that have been providing it for us all through the years of prohibition. So that's what I'm ranting about. That's what I'm unhappy about. That's what this show is all about. We want to get to the bottom of this. We want to expose this because we want to change this. We want medical access to cannabis for patients. We've got people that are overdosing on street drugs and opioids that if they had easy, low barrier access to high dose edibles, many of them would switch off of those opioids and street drugs, and we wouldn't have anywhere near the deaths going on that we have amongst our population. Our sons and our daughters and our uncles and our aunts that are dying from the scourge of tainted opioids that is directly resulting from prohibition and could be answered by having easy, low barrier access to high dose cannabis edibles and concentrates. So we're going to keep on punching at that until we get it. We've got some real good legal minds coming on today, free legal advice coming at you. And we're going to get to the heart of why our system is able to be as corrupt as it is and what we can do about it and what we are trying to do about it. So there's our rant for the day. And now we'll move to a few of the news stories that are in the last week here. Should have pulled that out ahead of time like I normally do, eh? That's all right. I'm a very forgiving audience. I know that because I don't have any hate mail yet, so thank you very much for all of that. I'll get better as we go too, I hope, and we'll get better at bringing you these stories and all this information. In the news, we have... CBD is a big one in the news, as always. I see it on all the newspaper or the newsstands as I'm going through the supermarket. There's all kinds of magazines touting the value of CBD. And I must say that there's the entourage of all of the cannabinoids that are really important as well. If you're using CBD, it's better to have a CBD high product that contains THC and the other entourage of cannabinoids as well. Although just plain CBD seems to work well for a lot of people. There's healthcare teams in Canada now, the doctors are turning to CBD to help people that are aggravated, suffering from dementia, hard to deal with when they come into the hospitals. And now they're understanding the value of CBD for helping people with anxiety and to calm them down. So that's really awesome as well. There was a child in the news, a nonverbal autistic child, who after only 2 days of taking CBD oil started talking. So there's all kinds of those miracle things that happen with cannabis as a medical program. In North Wales, they're reporting that there was a person there that had life-threatening cancer and was scheduled to die and given a death date, if you will. And they're all claiming that her life was prolonged with the use of cannabis oil and CBD oil. Cannabis oil, actually it wasn't the CBD oil in this case, it was cannabis oil, so that's probably high in THC, but also containing CBD and the other cannabinoids. But she was able to see her first grandchild and lived long enough for that and is still going on there. So CBD is a wonderful cannabinoid. There's a whole bunch of wonderful cannabinoids. We've had great success with the Cannabis Substitution Project with CBN, where people are using that for sleep disorders and to help them sleep. There's a whole host and range of how cannabis helps people. And on an opposite note, the land of the free and the home of the brave down there, the Navy has decided that CBD in all of its forms, from topicals to patches to ingestible CBD, is just too dangerous for their people, and they can't face those dangers, and they're not going to be able to use CBD in any form. In fact, if they're caught having CBD in any of those forms and using it, they could face discharge, they could lose all of their military benefits, and they'll be reported to the FBI. So good on the U.S. for fighting that dangerous cannabinoid CBD. We all know how many people are dying from that. Not. In fact, nobody's ever died from any cannabinoid, and I know, Navy of the U.S., you can't say that about any of the pharmaceutical medications that you allow your people to use. So give your heads a shake and pull it out of your asses and get on board with what's going on here. We're in a new world where freedom is going to reign, and people are going to be able to use cannabis products and CBD for whatever ails them, and that should mean especially people in the armed services who face PTSD and injuries from combat and all the other things that go wrong there. Why the hell wouldn't you let them use something that helps them? I just don't understand this. Although I do, really, because I've looked into it a lot, and I know it's hard for ordinary people to understand. It just makes no sense at all. But when you look at the things that make no sense, what you'll find is that usually there's a bunch of people making money off it. And that's the whole thing with prohibition, is it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry that feeds a whole bunch of different groups on the attempt to prohibit cannabis, and now the attempt to monopolize cannabis. And the military and the U.S. government and all these people are complicit and involved in this and protecting these other substitute industries for what cannabis could be used for. And that includes the pharmaceutical industry and the fuel industries and the textile industries, and on it goes. So when you look into the prohibition and the attempt to prohibit cannabis, you find out that it's the most amazing of plants. It's like what the buffalo was to the natives, and that it can be used for so many different things, and it's so beneficial. And that's why they spend so much money and effort and media attention trying to demonize it and prohibit it, is because it really does interfere and get in the way of the profits they want to make on their synthetics and the other substitutes that they have for cannabis. So now we have a world where our cannabis is being monopolized and taken over by these licensed producers, and we have a world where, it's 419. That's good to know. Got the 419 warning there. We'll get right to that. This story's just going to take a moment. And that's to say that the whole legal system is flawed in a number of different ways, but it's even stupidly flawed. They're acting like they were just regular drug dealers. There was someone who found that inside their canister that's supposed to contain a gram of weed, there was no weed in there. There was a couple of steel bearings in there. There was someone that opened up their pack of what was supposed to be pre-rolled and found the end of a pencil was in there. And on and on it goes. It's just nuts. I know there was another pre-roll container returned to a government store. There was nothing in it. It was empty, and they said that you could tell there was never been any joints in it because it didn't even smell of marijuana. But I'm here to tell you, I've smelled some of the government weed, and that's no indication that there was never any in there. But and just on another note, it's not proven yet, but there's strong suspicion that a licensed producer's facility has had some problems with their cooling towers, and it's resulting in people contacting Legionnaire's disease. So we're waiting to hear what the actual end result is of that, but the evidence is looking like that's what's going on. So it's 420. Light them if you got them. If you don't got them, what's wrong with you? And I have with me, of course, as always, Glenn Wells in studio. He helps me celebrate the 420 session. We think it's important to mark the 420 session because it's part of the culture that's evolved around cannabis. And we want to maintain these cultural things that happen around cannabis.
Damn right.
It brings our communities together. It gives us things to celebrate, and it gives us something to do at 420
and
twice a day.
And be social.
And be social. So how are you doing, Glenn?
Good, how are you? I got some good news.
Good, I like good news.
In Quebec today, the people that got raided 4 years ago actually won their case.
Nice.
Yes. So they're thinking, apparently, of maybe starting up some medical shops again. So these were the medical
shops.
Yep. Yeah, the medical shops that were busted 4 years ago, they actually won their case in Quebec today. So
cool.
There's some steps forward.
the Budzilla store was raided
Yeah,
here and forced to shut down. And I know the owner was not very happy about that. He felt that he had a way that he could make it work in this new system of providing edibles and medical cannabis to people. So he's very disappointed about that. But I asked him, was there any charges?
No.
No charges.
No charges.
No charges. I said, why do you think there was no charges, Reg? And there you were caught red-handed.
Yeah.
It's this criminally illegal
Is it because he went in front of the board?
Well, he says it's because they are afraid of another constitutional challenge. That they know that they can't win these things. They've lost every single time.
Whoa. That's some
The
rough.
only thing they won was that one that some of the dispensaries bonded together and went after the city on its ability to even make regulations for selling what was federally illegal.
Yeah.
And that wasn't a constitutional challenge. I don't think. I got the lawyers coming on.
Yeah, you got the lawyers. Right?
I'm going to ask them whether that's. I don't think it is. Though. It was just a challenge to the city's powers, is what it was. It's now being appealed. So it's not a constitutional challenge. So it's now being appealed, and it's in the process of appeal. But the city, the dispensaries had asked that up until the appeal is decided, that they be allowed to continue to operate.
Of course.
And the courts denied that.
Oh, really?
So facing potential contempt of court proceedings and all that means, and that's a very serious crime.
That's a serious charge, that's a serious
They felt that they couldn't risk their staff, and so they've shut down. And that is being appealed, and we're just waiting, however long it's going to take for the decision.
Well, it took 4 years for Quebec, right? So
it takes a long time for these things.
Oh, I know. And we've got Allard, like you were saying, right? We've got Allard on our side. Now Quebec has their medical win.
I wonder if that has implications here as well.
Oh, they apparently Michael Kleineman, my friend Michael CannaMatch, was celebrating. He was with the people when they actually got the decision today.
Cool.
I've got it in a voice message we can listen to if you want to.
If you got
want to hear? Yeah, I want to hear. Okay.
So put it up to your.
Put it up there. All right.
When you got it.
Okay.
I always like those kind of celebrations. People get really excited when they win a cannabis.
The main computer says. So we'll see once I get there. The traffic's not that bad. I don't want to jinx myself, but so far today's been a good day. Listen, the people here in Quebec City won against the province medically. The ones that were shut down 4 years ago, if you remember the raid there, or 2 years ago, whenever it happened. Basically, it was while I was having lunch with them, the decision came down. So today's been a good day, man, and I believe that, that you're going to get your days that will be shitty, and we're going to get our days that are going to be good.
Oh, there you go, right? Yeah, that's right from Montreal. He's right there, so... As he was saying, he was sitting with them when they got the decision today. So,
well, the Quebec government is stupid as hell when it comes to cannabis. So
I know.
What are they thinking?
Oh, and then this Bill, Bill 21 that they have, their Bill 21. That's a real stupid bill against immigrants, so they're kind of in their province and stuff. Yeah. Oh wow! And I saw it on last night on the on the debate. Scheer said that he wouldn't even stop that bill.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, he wouldn't even stop it.
Well, because there's some argument as to where the federal government has powers, but I'll tell you, I liked what Singh had to say.
Oh, Singh was great last night.
That it's just wrong against Canadians, and I think we need a federal government that will set limits on how provinces and cities, municipalities, can make bylaws and can affect their citizens. Because there's so much abuse, I think, of the power that these people have in the way that they come out with these regulations and these bylaws and at the federal level too. The laws that they put down, of course our big example is that
cannabis is bad, so let's not make it easy for them,
right? I've taken some plant matter, I dried it out, wrapped it up in some paper, I lit it on fire, and I'm inhaling it.
Yeah. And we eat it.
It's debatable whether it's anybody's business, whether I light myself on fire or not, let alone inhale something.
As long as you don't hurt somebody else.
As long as you're not hurting somebody else.
Exactly, yes.
It's really nobody's business but yours what you do.
Yeah.
And, if this was making me crazy and causing me to act in ways that were harmful, well, it's the acts that are harmful.
Yeah.
And then that's an issue for sure. And then there needs to be a warning. People need to be told.
Yeah,
so maybe at the point of sale, maybe an advertising campaign or something on radio and TV, where your government says, "Hey, folks, there's a bunch of people that are drying this particular plant out, rolling it up and inhaling it, And some of them are going crazy when they do that. So be careful if you're going to do that. Maybe do it in your own home. You know, don't go out in public if you're one of those people. You know, those are the kinds of regulations that you put onto things.
Yes.
Regulations have to be the least intrusive possible on your human rights as an individual.
Because we have rights, right?
And the least intrusive possible is where you start with things. And most things, the vast majority of things that require regulations, all they require is the education around it. A little bit of a warning on the package. Maybe if you need to have an advertising campaign about, you know, if you're going to send your 12-year-old to the gas station to get gas for your lawnmower, well, make sure it's in a proper container, because we've had a couple of kids blow up on their way home. You know, there needs to be a reason why you'd be spending tax dollars to have an advertising campaign. But, you know, something like that. But, you know, once you've given people the warning about most things, that's pretty much all you usually need. With these, you know, narcotics that they've come up with, these synthetics, these opioids, and the really strong narcotics, synthetics and stuff, you know, I mean, there needs to be some control over how those are dispensed to people. The warnings need to be severe, probably severe enough that you sit down with a healthcare professional for 10 or 15 minutes and discuss all the parameters of things. Probably severe enough that you don't let people under certain ages access them. You know, without the guardian there and the parent there. You know, you can then put advertising restrictions on things. You can then decide that things can't be as potent as what they are in this form, or maybe you want them more potent because then people will need to use less of it. And you know, all of those kind of regulations can come into effect when things warrant it. But this whole idea that me sitting here with this dried up herb that I'm inhaling is in any way harmful to me or anybody else, you know, is absurd. If it didn't cause me to go crazy, but it was hurting me. It was like going to kill me, cause an early death, you know, cause me disease and discomfort, and everybody knows it, and that's a well-known fact, and I'm still inhaling that. Well, that's still my business. If you love me, if you're my dad, if you're my uncle or some family member or community member, or maybe it's a church member or a hockey team member, and you care about me, what can you do about me deciding, in the face of all the information about it, to continue to inhale a little bit of it? What can you do?
Not much.
You talk to me. Talk to me.
Just because, you know, we think that cannabis
buddy,
is bad.
Maybe bring a few friends, sit me down and have an intervention, and all talk to me. You're probably not going to confine me in a room somewhere.
No.
You're probably not going to take all my money away from me.
Or put you in a white coat.
You're probably not going to hang a sign around my neck that says, you know, this person's a criminal, don't hire him. You know, you're probably not going to do any of those things. And that's all that people would do for somebody if they loved them and cared about them, if they were engaged in behavior that was harmful to them.
Harmful,
You know, but our government thinks that it's okay to, you know, we talk about harm reduction. Well, what they're involved in is harm maximization. That's why we want harm reduction.
I know.
They're like, hey, that stuff's dangerous. If we catch you with it, we're going to hurt you bad, man, because that stuff will hurt you.
Here's some pills instead, you know.
That's right.
We'll even pay for your pills, you know.
It's a stupid upside-down world, and the truth is that even the people that say they care about you and love you, you got to take what they say with a grain of salt. You can't always even trust them.
No.
You know?
Most
families, you can't even always trust your family members. Don't get into business with your family.
Never do.
Don't try to negotiate the will after a loved one dies, because you'll find out your family's not what you thought they were.
Yes.
So really, we're alone in this world. We can't trust anybody.
No.
And especially not a government.
Well, governments are going to trust.
Especially not a government.
I know we can trust people. I know that for sure.
Well, there's some people that you think you can trust, and me too, and we have to have trust. I mean, that's what makes everything work. If we didn't have some trust, nothing would ever get done.
No.
You know,
and
I'm not going to build that garage until you pay me in full for building it. You're not going to pay me a dime until you see some work done. You know, I mean, you got to have some trust. But you can't really trust anybody, and you shouldn't ever hand that over to anybody. And especially, you can't trust governments. They don't have your best interest in mind. You look at what their motivations are. It's to get reelected. It's to be able to get the paycheck they're getting for doing the job.
And then the paychecks after when they're done, because
and some of them have good ideas.
They get a pension and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot in it for them.
They're set for life.
And I'm not saying there's no good politicians, because there have
been some.
Well, I ran. You know, never had a chance of getting elected, but I would have been a good person if I'd have got in there.
Yeah,
because,
I think I would probably.
And I think I wouldn't have been corrupted, maybe. But you can't know that.
Corruption, you don't know until you get there, right?
You can't know that until you have one of your first behind-the-door meetings with these people.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we explored this a lot. Oh, we're only a minute over. That's
there you go. That's not so bad.
But governments get corrupted.
Yeah.
Because what are they doing? They're spending public money and they're making policy around what you do and don't consume and stuff. So.
As to trusting people, I gotta say,
where roads go? Are they going to go where this guy has his store?
Yeah.
Or are you going to put the new road on this one that has this guy's store?
They're going to avoid the store.
Well, this guy with this store, he's going to come at you and say, please put it down my road.
Yeah.
And hey, I'll contribute to your campaign. And this guy on this road, he's going to donate a little bit more. Maybe he's got 3 stores.
Yeah.
And that's the system we live in, is we put these public servants in the position where they're going to decide where to spend public money, how to spend public money, and they got a whole bunch of people called lobbyists that come at them with all these different reasons why they should go with this group or that group. And really it comes down to threats and bribes, and that's all it is. So that's okay, that's our system.
Who can make your life miserable.
But what we need to do is have lots of checks and balances if that's the case.
Yeah.
We need to make these people transparent if that's the case. We need to not have those meetings behind closed doors.
No.
We need to be able to dial up on our smartphone MP Watch and just see what they're doing right now.
Yeah.
Who are they meeting with right now?
Yeah.
What are they talking about? Let's go to the app and get the contracts up there that they're looking at,
Sort of like Big Brother for MPs.
A little bit of a film crew with every MP to accomplish that. 2 people is all it would take. And 2 people with every one of our MPs is a lot less than the bombs that we've been supplying for war, and a lot less than a bunch of other money that we're wasting on other things.
Yeah.
Especially the attempt to prohibit cannabis.
I know.
Let's take that money.
They spent lots of money on that,
And have these people be transparent, have them be limited, so that they're obviously not allowed to do certain things.
Yeah, somebody said something about that last night in the debate, that there should be other levels of government that form all this government, including the indigenous people sitting at the same table, so that everybody is there saying, this is what we want to do, right?
With municipal governments, let's have an overlooking regulatory body. Not 3 or 4 layers of regulatory bodies overlooking regulatory bodies. You don't need that.
No.
But you need one that's going to have a look at these people putting regulations on things and make sure that they're put on reasonably for the right reasons, and that the people are being protected, but that their rights are also being protected. So I think we can really evolve our government. I like what Elizabeth May said in the debate about public servants being there for service and not having won the lottery to fucking lord it over everybody for the next 4 years. And she's the only one who made that kind of comment. Anyway, thanks, Glenn.
You have a good week. That's always fun.
And we'll do it again next week.
We'll see you next week.
Thanks everybody
I'll move out of the way.
420 session. I'm sure a lot of people sparked up as soon as the phone was 420.
I love doing this. All right.
Thank you so much. All right. I'm going to come back over here for a minute. I think we covered all the news stories, so we're going to get right to the Martin medical moment. And I always like to give a little overview on what this is about. Primarily and generally speaking, this segment is about the push for having access to medical cannabis through storefront dispensaries. And it's the Martin medical moment because Jerry Martin was a dispensary owner in a small town in Saskatchewan. And for 4 years, he was helping the clientele out there. In fact, he had 1,000 members in a town with 1,000 people. And some of those members were from out of town, of course, but it just shows the scope of how many people he was helping percentage-wise within that community that he was living in. And Jerry is an emotional fellow, and I'm sure that he was really enjoying what he was doing there as a dispensary owner. I've been there myself, and you really can't have much of a better job when people are happy all the time with you, and they're thanking you for being there, and especially in the face of laws that prohibit access to cannabis. When people find out that they can actually have a source and they can get what they need and they can have their medical conditions looked after in a natural and in a green way, that's a very powerful thing. And being a dispensary owner is a very powerful thing when you're helping these people and they let you know how much you're helping them, and it really brings you to tears on a regular basis. And for myself and for the other dispensary owners that I know personally, you really do go to bed at night with a real sense that you're helping people, and every day is dynamic, and you wouldn't stop it for the world until, and knowing you don't stop it then either. But what happened was, of course, what he was doing was illegal. And Health Canada sent him a letter saying, stop doing what you're doing. Well, Jerry had to think about that long and hard because, like I said, you're not going to stop helping people and you don't want to turn people away. And so what's the climate? What's the situation? Do you have to stop? What does this letter mean? And we rolled it around on this show. And, in a climate where there's like 150 dispensaries operating in Vancouver and many others all across Canada and in Ontario, and now we're moving to legalized cannabis, and you think, well, I'm going to be included in that system because I'm doing this right, and I'm going to be allowed to keep doing what I'm doing and keep helping people, and I just got to keep going. And he didn't imagine that the RCMP were going to show up there and put him in handcuffs, but they did, and seized all of his assets and belongings and shut him down in the little town there. And now he's been facing threats from the legal system for over 3 years, and still, they're going to proceed against him in court, and he'll probably never see his assets again. And thankfully, he's also launched a constitutional challenge against this because this is just unreasonable, it's cruel, and it needs to be addressed. And so thankfully, he's taken on the role of fighting this through the courts. And that is a very difficult battle. And for an emotional guy that's been shut out of doing what he cared about doing and now facing punishment and penalty and all the rest of that, it's been a very tough road to hoe for Jerry. And we're joining him on his journey with this show, and going to follow him all the way through to the end, and hopefully we'll get good results. But in the meantime, it's a struggle. And I'm very pleased to have Jerry come and join us on the show every week and talk to us about what's going on with that. So, hi, Jerry.
How you doing?
How are you this week?
I'm great.
You're great. In the up and down roller coaster world of Jerry.
Yeah, man. Entertainment at its best.
Yeah. I'm glad you can look at it that way. You kind of sort of have to, well, it's good if you can separate yourself out a little bit and just sort of say, okay, well, this is what's going on. And,
I know what's going on. That's it. Yeah.
You can only control so much, eh?
Yeah, that's it.
And the rest is kind of
getting better every day.
Getting better every day. Well, that's a great way to be. Yeah. I like that too. I'm trying to get better every day too.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm fighting age.
Yeah.
And that's hard, but
did another session of 5-MeO, so
yeah,
yeah, it definitely helped with things.
And
sure.
Did that reset the way you thought it would?
The second time was a little different. I put a little different intentions into it.
Right.
And we did it a different way.
Right.
We snorted a couple of lines first to get you into the space, and then instead of just obliterating my ego.
I got to get your lawyer on the phone here.
Oh, yeah.
He's expecting my call. He's probably wondering why I haven't called him already. And then we're going to talk about what's going on with your case. Speaker.
Paul Lewin.
Hi, Paul. Neil Magnuson on air here in the studio in Vancouver. How are you doing?
Hey, Neil. Very good.
I got Jerry Martin with me here.
Hey, Paul.
Hey, Jerry.
So we just started rolling over a little bit. We haven't got into any of the details of what's going on. From your perspective, what's going on with the case?
So we filed our constitutional challenge, our application to challenge the laws, and we filed our affidavits that we're going to be relying upon.
Can you give us a glimpse into that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're really saying is that cannabis patients have the right to access their medication as they need it, on demand, in person. And as any medical patient who's tried to work through Health Canada's system knows, there's a whole series there. You have to register with a licensed producer, which can take 1 to 3 weeks. Every time you order, it takes 1 to 3 days. If any other medication in Canada, when you walk out of your doctor's office, you can walk straight to either the pharmacy or a natural health product store or wherever, whether
I agree. And in fact, I would go farther than that, because a lot of the over-the-counter medications that you can just go to any drugstore here in Vancouver 24 hours a day in the middle of the night, if there's a whole bunch of medicines that you can get that, in my opinion, pose way greater risks to people than anything to do with cannabis.
Well, that's a great point. Absolutely. I don't know what the federal government's game plan is. At times, it almost makes me think they're hoping to phase out medical cannabis, that it's going to stop being a medicine if they just treat medical cannabis patients badly enough.
So do you think it was reasonable, or would have been reasonable, for Jerry to stop providing these much needed medical products to people in the face of that letter from Health Canada? Do you think that was a black and white easy decision? He's just going to stop and not do that anymore? Or do you think he felt he had some obligation and some protection under the law to continue helping people?
Well, Jerry clearly was doing it. He had no protection under the law other than the Constitution, but he was acting, he was doing what he did because he felt it was the right thing to do, because he couldn't leave these patients stranded.
So you're aware of somebody's medical distress, and you decide to break the law to help them. Is there no protection in law for that type of an action? I don't see any mens rea there, at all, or any victim involved. So I'm not sure how the criminal law could really even be applied to that, or am I naive?
Well, so that you're saying that you're raising the necessity defense. So that is a defense, necessity. It's a tough defense, and it's been raised a few times in the early days of medical cannabis. It's never succeeded because it's got to be an absolute last resort. And I think really this case is less about, necessity. That's not a bad argument, but I know it has failed in the cannabis context. And I think the real problem and the legacy Jerry wants to leave is he wants things better for cannabis patients in the future. He's gone through just a ton of misery over this thing, and he's been so badly treated. But when he leaves this thing, he doesn't just want to leave with a win. He also wants to leave something positive for cannabis patients. And by challenging the law, he can do that.
That's what we want him to do too. Let me ask Jerry, if I may. Jerry, did you have clients at your store, at your dispensary, that were in immediate medical distress? Did you have epileptic patients, for example, that without your giving them access to cannabis would have, maybe had their lives severely compromised or even ended?
Yeah, I had a few epileptic patients. One child that had, I think it was 70 seizures a day.
Wow.
Tons of medications. And I still keep in contact with them. Today, he's a healthy, happy little boy. He's on zero medications, no seizures for many years now. Nice. In karate class. Really giving them their lives back for sure.
Can you hear Jerry properly, Paul?
It's a little faint.
Yeah, he was saying that he did have some of his patients or clients that maybe would have even qualified for the necessity to continue to have access provided by him. Jerry was in a position where he certainly knew how to get access to these cannabis products, and I think there was a lot of people in town that had come to really rely on him. I'm just putting it out there that that seems to me like when a law is not protecting, like, I think laws are there to keep people from being harmed. And I think that when the law comes into play but nobody was being harmed, and in fact because the law's at play now somebody's gonna end up being harmed, now, I would think that law is now null and void, but there again, I'm just a layperson. I don't know these things. Do I have any footing?
You just hit the nail on the head. That's exactly how things work. When the law is doing no good, and in fact doing harm, and preventing someone from doing good, then that law should be of no force and effect.
Right.
And if we succeed, that would be the case, and it would force the government to do something about this.
So,
For those out there who have either operated a dispensary in the past, or even legal producers or growers who care about medical cannabis, they should be donating to this case, because this is all about having medical cannabis patients get access for them.
Right. I know a number of edible makers that we're wanting to be part of the legal system. Won't be at 10 milligrams per dose for sure, but they've had their businesses curtailed so much. Many of them have gone out of business because they don't have the dispensaries to sell their products into anymore as well. So you're right, there's a bunch of people whose interests are at play here with this particular challenge. So if you're successful in arguing that the restriction on people's access to cannabis for medical purposes is completely arbitrary and unreasonable, would that also vindicate Jerry in their pursuit of him for providing these products when they're not allowed?
It would be, yes. The laws they've charged him under, the offenses they allege that he's committed, those laws would be of no force in effect. And there's various other money-related law offenses they've charged him with. Really, it's essentially just he has money that he got from running a dispensary. Jerry also donated a ton of it to the local community, and many of his clients didn't even charge money because that's the way he is, and that's kind of the way the cannabis community is. And not the way corporations are.
No, or even governments, it seems. We can't get them to back our project where we've been giving out high-dose cannabis edibles for over 2.5 years. And we just finally got the city here in Vancouver to pass a motion to allow low-barrier access to cannabis, specifically to address the overdose opioid crisis, which has to mean high-dose edibles. But there's no provision within the Cannabis Act, and they're not scheduled to revisit it for another 4 years with respect to the dosage. So there's a lot of people that are really struggling and being left out by our governments as well. Anything else you'd like to add, Paul?
Well, just that this is really, in some ways, is the perfect case to make these arguments. Everybody knows medical users aren't the same as recreational users. And this whole idea that a 22-year-old who's picking up his case of beer and grabbing his pot for a Friday night party gets better treatment than the elderly woman stricken with arthritis who who's supposed to register and go online and wait days for her medicine to apply. That's wrong. It's upside down and backwards. And she should have special treatment, have a place to go that caters to her. And that's what this case is all about. It's a perfect case to make the argument. Because when Jerry was there was no recreational stores. All there was on this horrible online system. So,
and there was a few basement dealers in Whitewood at the same time. The people there tell me they don't understand why they went after Jerry and not those people. And now I was there about 3 weeks ago. I was in Whitewood, and they're telling me there's 2 meth houses that they're very aware of right now that they're having all kinds of troubles with that didn't exist when Jerry had his dispensary. So it's a real crime that they've prevented these people in that area from getting the access that Jerry provided for them, for sure. Are you aware of the case that's being pursued by John Conroy on a similar vein?
A little bit. I know it concerns the extract limits that Health Canada, the oil limits that...
and the edible limits, for sure. I'm sure you guys will want to be communicating in the near future here about how your cases might overlap a little bit.
Yes, for sure. I'm sure John will crush it.
He's here in studio with me right now. So,
all right. Well, my best to John, and thank you for raising this important case, Neil. Very much appreciated.
Thanks for coming on, Paul. I really appreciate it. All the best, and all the best of luck in the case.
Thanks, Paul.
You're welcome.
Bye for now.
Cool. So yeah, it's still a bit of a battle. We don't have any firm dates yet. It's sometime next spring.
Sometime in the spring, we're hoping.
Right.
Yeah. Later in the spring, it'll be nicer. It's a little warmer.
Well, you know how it's been going, Jerry. If they get it off in the spring, that'll be a miracle.
It will be, for sure.
I don't think they ever get it off at all. I've been telling them that since the beginning. I think they're just dragging this out. I don't think it'll ever go see the light of day in a courtroom.
Well, we're hoping.
But we'll see.
Actually, I'm hoping so.
We need that constitutional part.
I would like to.
We need that in the courtrooms, unless they were to just back off and reset.
I would be very disappointed if they dropped the case after that.
Yeah, you want your day after all of this, for sure. And thank you so much for hanging in there and all that it takes to do that. I'm glad the recent treatments look like they're paying off.
Oh yeah,
and,
for sure,
sure. You in a good frame of mind is way better than you in a bad frame of mind. So,
for sure.
There you go.
Yeah.
What's that now?
This is my new company, Microdelics.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we're going to start doing microdosing LSD boxes,
Nice.
kits for everybody.
And what's
giving
the medical
magic
purpose of that?
mushrooms.
Because it is a medical product, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to, and I really shouldn't say this probably on camera, but anyways, so get a little in, and so hopefully we're going to try and get these approved by Vancouver Coastal Health before I make them available to the public. So I'm going to go down that road first. I was trying to go the better route before I just start selling them.
There's a
so like a
huge
safe supply of mental health drugs as well as opiates.
There's a huge push
need.
right now, and a huge amount of studies being done and released about the effects and the positive effects of these substances.
Yeah, well, it's because there was so many studies back in the 50s and 60s until it became popular in the psychedelic community, and they got a little out there with Leary and everybody else, and then they, companies like Delison 25, the product Delison 25, they took off the shelves just to do, because of all that bad media and things like that. So it really, it's a real big setback for a lot of decades, and what it can do for people for sure. So its time has come for sure.
Well, thanks for doing that, and all the best with that, and good luck with that. Thanks for coming in again on another Martin Medical Moment.
Yeah, man.
And we'll see you next week, I'm sure,
right.
and more updates to come. So, thanks,
all right,
Jerry.
Thanks, Neil.
So, lots of news to talk about with respect to where we're moving on the medical front of cannabis. This so-called legalization has really done a job of annihilating most of the dispensaries that were providing people access to these things, and this can't be tolerated, and we're not going to let it stand, and so we're fighting that fight. And as I alluded to earlier, and I'm very happy to have in studio with me today John Conroy, who's fighting another constitutional battle on a very similar vein with respect to what Jerry and Paul Lewin are doing. In the case with John, this constitutional challenge is about the cap on edibles that are going to be available in these non-medical recreational stores, capped at 10 milligrams, which is the correct dose for people who've never used cannabis edibles before. That's about where you want to start. But it's certainly not the dose that most people end up with, and it's certainly not the dose that people use when they're using it for severe medical conditions, or in the case of trying to offset the use of opioids and other street drugs, which is also medical conditions, because at the base of most of that addiction that's going on, there's depression and there's anxiety and there's physical disabilities through many different workplace accidents and things like that. There's trauma that people have suffered through childhood sexual abuse and other things like that. And the root of most of the addiction that's in our neighborhoods and that people are suffering from is pain, be it emotional, be it physical. But many of those things are at the root of that addiction. And so cannabis in the form of high-dose edibles and concentrates can deal with that pain and can deal with the anxiety and can deal with those other situations. It can help people sleep, and it can help them with their nutritional requirements and those sorts of things. So like I said, very pleased to have in studio John Conroy. His reputation precedes him. He probably doesn't need any introduction. In our community, he's been at the forefront of fighting our battles in the courts for a very long time. Welcome, Mr. Conroy.
Thank you, Neil.
How are you today, sir?
Good, thank you.
I thought you were going to have a friend with you.
I thought I was going to have two young friends possibly with me, Jack Lloyd and Matthew Jackson, who could have enlightened us a little bit even more, because they're working with Paul, as I understand it, on Jerry's case. And so it was interesting to catch that part of the interview.
What happened?
My understanding is that, you see, in Jerry's case he's charged, and so he's raising it as we did in the original cases in terms of medical. But your viewers should know that we've also got a questionnaire out there that we've been trying to get to all medical patients, especially from the various clubs that are closing down.
Right.
To fill out the question.
How do we find that questionnaire?
Well, I think it's medicaldispensaries@gmail.com is the email. But if they emailed me or Jack or Matthew, any of the...
What's your email
I think
address?
jconroy@johnconroy.com.
Okay.
I tried to post it as well to different places. I'm having to as an old guy, get some technical advice as to how to do it properly.
Social media networking.
Hoping, and it's basically a questionnaire arising out of what's happened in the Karuna case, it's called, that's now on appeal.
I was going to ask
in
you
order
about that.
to find out, what do the medical patients say when they are no longer able to go to the Compassion Club or medical dispensary that they've been going to. Suddenly, their regular, reasonable access that they've been exercising is gone.
I get asked all the time.
And so, so the judge sort of suggested, well, it's convenience, isn't it? And of course it's convenience. Isn't convenience part of reasonable access?
I would think so.
I mean, just as you were saying, being able to go to the pharmacy instead of waiting to get it in the mail, and it may not be good and you have to send it back. That's what
Or
the
the
court
liquor
in
store,
Allard...
Judge. Or the liquor store. Anybody can walk into a liquor store anytime they want and purchase all kinds of stuff.
Well, that's
it's
right.
not
But
even for medical purposes.
I think it's important to remember that when we challenge the constitutionality of the MMPR, Marijuana for Medical Purposes regs that Harper brought in to try and take away your right to grow or have somebody grow for you from the MMAR, Medical Marijuana Access regs, the court found the MMPR in its entirety, which is the LP system, to be unconstitutional.
Right.
And it was only being fixed by bringing back the other two. So the ACMPR was really just an amalgamation of the two with a few tweaks, and is now mostly, with a few more tweaks, Part 14 now of the cannabis
But in your opinion, still not complying at all with...
Well, the absence of dispensaries, provision for medical dispensaries and compassion clubs, and there are slight differences between them. I think that the compassion club model can exist under existing laws. It's a bit of a not complete fit, but what I've been advising is that people who are running strictly medical dispensaries, where the people have to be medically approved, which is the current gatekeeper thing at the moment.
We're going to challenge that.
Which I think, needs to clearly be challenged in terms of bringing in naturopaths and doctors of traditional Chinese medicine, no question. But so if that's what the club or dispensary is doing, they should apply to the feds for a license to sell medical cannabis. That's a federal license.
Is that a Section 56?
No, it's
that,
simply under the Cannabis Act and regulations. You've got all these licenses: produce, process, sell, nursery,
there's a whole bunch
industrial
of
hemp, and then there's a license to sell for medical, which is a sub-license of a license to sell generally. Now, the provincial laws expressly say that they're not dealing with medical cannabis.
Right.
So the provinces have been given the power to deal with recreational social cannabis, not medical.
Well, isn't medical a provincial jurisdiction?
No, it's health is a shared power constitutionally, but the feds say this isn't health legislation, this is still criminal law. So that's why I've said before, you've got a bit of legalization, which for most people 30 grams when they're out and about is usually probably enough, or being able to grow 4 plants of any size. We had lots of humor about the 100 centimeter rule and the officers having the tape measures and the difference between when they measure on the Friday versus the Monday. But anyway, they at least came to their senses about that one.
Yeah.
But so
still
we moved there.
Restriction, but sure, 4 plants, yeah.
And if you're slightly over, you're into the ticketing scheme with a maximum penalty of a $200 fine. So we're heading in the right direction. That's
and they would take your plants or make you destroy the extra ones or something.
Yeah, they probably would, I suppose. Yeah. But the problem remains is anything above that is still criminal law. And, I think a lot of it's smoke and mirrors to pacify the right wing and so on, to say we're protecting children and so on and so forth. But at the same time, it's wrong for them to still have, even though I don't expect anybody to be charged on indictment, I'm trying to think of how serious it would have to be. Because in the old days, you had to be charged on indictment. Jerry is probably charged on indictment if it's Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, trafficking and possession for the purpose of trafficking. Yeah. Indictment only, maximum life. Now, at least it's a hybrid where you could get 6 months or 18 months, I think it is, and 5,000 to 15,000 in fine. So the Crown has, and the police can go that way as we head towards, hopefully, greater and greater liberalization. But still keeping a 14-year max, which is what Harper put in for production. Sure, great to reduce it from life for trafficking and so on, but a 14-year max means you can't get a conditional sentence order, house arrest. There's a provision in the code that if the penalty is 14 years to life, you can't get a house arrest conditional sentence, or nor can you get an absolute or conditional discharge down at the lower end. So there's still huge problems. But anyway, you wanted to talk about the extracts case, and I'm rambling on other things.
I want to talk about lots of things. We've got some time.
Okay.
I talked about the need with putting on regulations to balance human rights with that, and that they need to be the least intrusive possible. And I would think that the courts are bound by similar types of requirements, that they need to be really aware of human rights and where all this fits. But I mean, how much of a role does our old common law have to play in things? A crime, by the old definition, is requiring the actus reus and the mens res. You have to know in your mind that you're going to cause this damage before you do it, and then you do it, and the court or the crown has to prove all of that. And there needs to have been that intent and the damage done and a victim in the courtroom. Having possession of a bunch of plants in your basement because you thought you might make some money out of that. I mean, that is such a perversion and a distortion in my mind of what a crime actually is. It really dilutes in my mind. I mean, a criminal is somebody that's a nasty person that's going to steal your stuff and hurt you physically, knowing that that's wrong, and he's still going to do it. But someone growing plants in the basement, and especially in the world that we live in, where we've been, all with pot activists out there telling people they should be growing, and there's such question over the laws, and there's legalization here and not there, and there's no cut and dry. How is that even a crime, John?
Well, you're forgetting that we took that case to the Supreme Court of Canada. It was called Regina versus Kane, and it was joined with Regina versus Malmo Levine at the Court of Appeal, and then joined with Regina versus Clay in the Supreme Court of Canada. And so we had 3 cases, all heard together in the Supreme Court of Canada. Kane being a simple possession of a brooch, I think it was, at Wreck Beach, and Malmo was his harm reduction club.
Well, the no harm principle in dealing cannabis.
And Clay had some plants in the window of his store or something like that.
They combined those 3 cases in that decision?
Well, we asked to join them so that we could.
There'd be enough ridiculousness in there that they could probably agree.
The problem, in a way, when I said we asked to join them, my memory is we didn't have much choice in the matter. We had to, because we were in provincial court, catch up with David, who had been in BC Supreme Court, because that's a higher court binding on the lower court. Yeah. And then we caught up by the Court of Appeal, so we were heard together, and we got a dissent in the Court of Appeal from one of the 3 judges, which gave us a right of appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada, which we wouldn't have had otherwise for Randy Kane. And then Clay joined in. Now, as it turned out, no offense to David, I think we would have if we'd had Randy Kane's simple half a joint by itself, it might have been more sympathetic than bringing in all the other stuff, which Malmo is bringing in, trafficking and possession of purpose trafficking and all that. It makes it a more complicated case. He was great, though. He had his hemp suit on and his hemp tie. And
I've seen the pictures. I was pretty familiar with the case. Yeah, the way David described it to me was that the decision is that they decided that cannabis had an ephemeral damage that was difficult to articulate, and that it was similar to cannibalism and incest and a pimp and prostitute and abuse of animals.
No, they said, look, this is the harm principle, while an important principle in terms of criminal law, was not a principle of fundamental justice within the meaning of Section 1 of the Charter.
Really?
And so
do you agree with that decision?
Well, I think we've moved forward into other sorts of areas in terms of defining those principles, and we'll come to that in a moment. So I don't know if we need to go back down that road. The problem simply was, they said, it's up to Parliament, it's a political question, to decide what levels of harm or risk of harm they're going to criminalize. You don't, for purposes of criminal law, have to have a victim in the specific sense of another human being.
In common law, there used to have to be a victim, didn't there?
Well, I'm not
and
so
you need
sure.
to be able to see
but
that person in the courtroom with you.
They pointed to a few ridiculous offenses where there was no victim. I can't even remember.
Well, those are the ones
those are probably the ones you were
yeah.
describing. But they said, look, it's up to Parliament. I mean, unless you can bring it within the charter.
That's a cop-out.
Well, it depends. It depends, because let's just come back now. Remember that since 1982, and I was called to the bar in 1972, when the number of people busted went from a few hundred a year to 10,000.
Right.
And so all of a sudden, there's all these people being busted for cannabis offenses. And I argued the Canadian Bill of Rights till I was blue in the face. People used to laugh. Conroy's here again, he's going to argue the Canadian Bill of Rights. It was only a federal statute. It wasn't a constitutional document. And so
the charter changed some of that, right?
The charter absolutely changed that. We became a constitutional democracy in 1982. That means that Parliament was no longer supreme. They couldn't do whatever they want anymore.
Well,
there's
nice.
a supreme law of the land, and it's called the Canadian Constitution, which includes the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so that's
to be
what
completely
when
interpreted, though, right?
well, the independent courts interpret the charter, and the Supreme Court of Canada
It's an ongoing process. We're not.
Exactly. And so what has developed, though, is, for example, using the medical cannabis, which came then after Terry Parker. Well, actually, it was around about the same time, I think, that Terry's case was moving up, around 2001, somewhere in there. I think we were in the Supreme Court of Canada in 2003, I think, was Malmelamin. But anyway, so the Ontario Court of Appeal agreed with Judge Shepherd in the Ontario High Court that Mr. Parker's doctor was approving him for cannabis for his epilepsy, having tried all these other things that weren't working and having been told that a couple of puffs would stop his seizure. And so while the trial judge was going to give an exemption from the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, the Court of Appeal said, no, that's not the way we can do it. We can't just exempt, but we're going to basically find him not guilty because the government has failed to provide a medical exemption for medically approved patients. And so the underlying thing to understand there is the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, the Narcotic Control Act before that, and drug laws are put forward with the purpose of protecting the public's health. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's the purpose. So when a doctor comes along who is an expert on health, by definition, and says, my patient needs this for his or her health.
Great.
There's a massive inconsistency between the two. And so that's what the court said. The government has arbitrarily, which is not it's to have your rights affected not in accordance with principles of fundamental justice. And so when they do something arbitrarily, it's not in accordance with principles of fundamental justice. So we say the principles of fundamental justice that have been identified, and they're not the principles, they're the things to avoid the violation of the principles, are arbitrariness, overbreadth, when a government goes further than necessary to achieve an objective, and what's the other one? Overbreadth, gross disproportionality. If you pass a law that results in grossly disproportionate effects, that's going to violate principles as well. So people have to understand you've got all these basic fundamental rights, and most of them are subject to Section 1 of the Charter. So you've got the right to freedom of association, for example, but it's subject to reasonable limits prescribed by law that are demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society.
So
and the onus is on the government to justify the reasonable limit. So you say, okay, that's now the supreme law of the land. So if we can establish that they are, for example, denying freedom of association for cannabis consumers to come to, say, a vapor lounge, what law, because remember it has to be prescribed by law. Is there a federal law that says you can't? No. Is there a provincial law that says you can't? I don't think so. There's some about not promoting them, but I don't think there's any that expressly say you can't do it. There's municipal bylaws, smoking bylaws, things like that they will come and use if they are so inclined. And often they don't enforce bylaws unless there's a complaint. So that's, but if that law was there and said, you cannot have a vapor lounge, we would go to court and say, you're impacting freedom of association, justify it. Prove that this is a reasonable limit.
And that's what you're doing with the extract case, right? You're taking them to court and saying, prove that there's a reason to
But remember, we now have Parker, we have Allard, in which we reaffirmed all of that, so that the government has to provide reasonable access to medically approved patients to prevent the violation of their Section 7 constitutional rights, which is the right to life, liberty, and most importantly, security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with principles of fundamental justice. So, with that, if you have a opioid-addicted person who is at risk of death, the opioid crisis, everybody knows, and a doctor says, I'm prescribing, pursuant to their power to prescribe cannabis under Section 53 of the Narcotic Control Regs, for your medical condition that I'm treating you for, then that person should be able to get more than 0.10 or 10 milligrams of THC in the edible, or 10 milligrams of THC in the extract, right. Because they're not novice users. Great to make sure they have those products for the novice user, absolutely. But these are chronic users. These are people who have been addicted to heavy opiates and who are able to get on a drug that we now know is conclusively effective for chronic pain, so that they can have a drug that won't kill them, that has no lethal dose, in order to either help get them off the opiates, or hopefully not ever start on the opiates and have the doctors prescribe the cannabis. So we say the failure on the part of the government to provide for more than 10 milligrams of edibles and extracts THC is, again, a constitutional omission, failing to provide medical access. And as I think some of your earlier discussion is, I completely agree. They brought in the rec market, and everybody went racing to the rec market and has neglected the medical folks, who are the ones whose constitutional rights are involved. There's no constitutional rights.
Not only neglected them, but sent in British Columbia, we got the CSU running around closing down all these dispensaries, even though they were providing access to the medical patients for products that aren't available.
That's right, and I've been taking this position that, look, you apply for a license to sell medical cannabis. Your grower has to have a license to produce and sell for medical purposes to you as your compassion club.
With all the restrictions that they have on that.
Your compassion club get a license to sell for medical purposes to its registered member patients. And then you tell the producer to ship to the named individual caregiver responsible for the patient at the compassion club. So the patients registered to the club, just as if they were registered now with Shoppers Drug Mart, that's got a license to sell for medical purposes. The producer sends it to the club, it's stored at the club, and theoretically the patient goes to the club to pick it up, which is closer to a pharmacy model, at least, than what we've got. They can store it there.
Access.
No. But it's heading in that direction. Absolutely right. I mean, low barrier access, though, is a whole even more significant issue.
That's what the City of Vancouver passed, was to allow for low barrier access to cannabinoids to deal with the opioid crisis, which means high dose edibles. That has to be available there too.
But compassion clubs have always tried to do that, haven't they? To have.
This is a new world, because this is a new motion. And,
but I'm talking. They've always had donations and so on to try and provide for people who can't afford.
I'm not a member of the Compassion Club. I'm not sure what their policies are, but I believe that they're the Compassion Club, and that's kind of what they do, is make sure that people do get access. I think.
So it's in the direction of the. But you're absolutely right. And that's beyond that. A medical dispensary has to be available where people can go and get low end access.
Is it not a violation of your medical privacy rights to force you to have to disclose to some dispensary that there's something wrong with you to get permission to use that substance. It just doesn't seem right to me at all. I've never felt comfortable with that.
But when you go to a pharmacy with a prescription from your doctor...
Well, we're not talking prescription. The cannabis shouldn't be by prescription. That's ridiculous. It's not a narcotic that's got any danger level to it. It's one of the safest commodities out there.
Yeah, okay, but
so
that's
many
a whole other...
over-the-counter drugs in drugstores are way more problematic for us as
no question
society.
about it. No question about it.
Not to mention the booze stores, Another point that's more unrelated is the disproportionate application of things. The restriction on where you can access cannabis, even for the rec purposes, is so disproportionate with respect to what it's like for cigarettes, for commercial tobacco.
And that is a problem of local government.
All kinds of evidence that commercial tobacco is killing millions of people. It's the reason for the number one reason for hospital
number one
bills,
preventative disease or illness or deaths.
Yeah, and yet they're available in every gas station right from here to the other side of Canada. It doesn't matter how close they are to schools or each other or anything else.
My father was a consultant on the growing of tobacco in Central Africa. He got a degree from McGill and went out to the colonies, and if he saw a cannabis plant and amongst the tobacco, he'd pull it up and throw it on the ground. That was the extent of the enforcement.
Do you know how many tobacco plants you're allowed to grow? I don't think it's how many plants you're allowed to grow for tobacco. It's how many pounds you're allowed to have.
I know. I don't know what that is at all under the current.
I don't think it
but
how many plants you can have, just how many pounds you can have, and it's some ridiculously large number.
There's just no question that alcohol and tobacco are far bigger problems, as are prescribed drugs. You go to the pharmacy, you'll see the poster that says 80,000 kids got high last year. Wow, on their parents' prescribed drugs. Lock up your drugs. They don't say take them to prison. They say lock up your drugs.
Our only recourse, unless we can write a letter to the minister in charge and get him to just change his mind and policies, our only recourse is to challenge him in the courts and go through, have someone.
Well, unfortunately, my experience has been that reason, logic, and rationality in terms of trying to persuade politicians of whatever persuasion, and the right wing certainly are much more difficult than the others, it just goes on and on and on, and it's really hard to get something done.
Like Paul
and so if you go to court,
the
charter has given us this ability to go to court, and we've discovered in Allard a way of getting to the hearing fairly quickly and getting a decision within a year instead of many, many years, and you get a court order. And that court order compels them to do things. And
Allard resulted immediately with an injunction allowing those people covered under the MMAR
to preserve
to continue
the MMAR.
To do what they were doing,
within
as long as they didn't
dates.
change their address and all that, which is also crazy.
There were some weird dates,
but those people are now still covered under the injunction, as I understand.
The injunction was continued by Judge
Phelan has not removed that because I don't think he's yet happy with the situation as it is.
I don't know if he even is being kept informed of it. He simply said that the injunction continues until further order of the court. The court's not going to do that on their own. If the feds applied to do it, which they might, in order to say, look, you've had enough years to transition, you're going to get the exact same thing under the Part 14 ACMPR as you've got, or you can make some changes. I mean, the fact is all those people who had to make changes had to go ACMPR to do it. And so I've said to people, look,
you can still grow for yourself, right, under the ACMPR.
Oh yeah, no, it's the same model, the dosage. Tells you what your plant count and so on. The interesting thing now is there's no storage limit. You can store as much as you want.
Is there an advantage to remaining under the MMAR injunction?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think there's a double advantage to going under the new one because you've still got your MMAR. It's not going to disappear just because you've got the other one. Right. It's still there until further order of the court. So you protect yourself in case suddenly there is a further order of the court, although I expect you'll get lots of notice. But nevertheless, you then have, more importantly, because you have to prove your entitlement to possess and keep a copy on you, I recommend a certified true copy. If you're stopped by the police, you have to prove that you're lawfully in possession. And if you have an MMAR, you'll have some police say, oh, it's expired, it's no good.
Well, I've been through that numerous times.
You got an ACMPR, you're okay. So get an ACMPR simply so that you're covered.
I'm one of the people that covered under the injunction, but changed the address, which you're not allowed to do, so I can't grow anymore, and yet I think I'm going to grow, and I think I'm going to grow, somewhere around the amount that I'm allowed to grow, or would have been allowed to grow there. What kind of penalty could I be looking at for doing that?
Well, it depends on all the facts, of course.
And whether I hire you or
not. There's still an offense to produce, as I say, more than, say, 6 plants. You're taking yourself out of the legalization and the decriminalization, and you're putting yourself into the criminal law again.
Right.
So the number of plants, the size of the plants, all kinds of things. But the fact that you're medical, they're going to say to you, well, why? You're familiar with the medicals thing. Why didn't you apply? The judge is going to say, I'd love to give you a discharge, but why didn't you use what was available?
I want to mention something else too about having to have your paperwork on you at the time, which was important because when the cops pull you over, you want to have that, even though it says it's expired. If you explain it properly, and there's a phone number they can call and all the
Tell
rest
them
of
to
that.
go online and
I
see.
had my car stolen just 2 blocks from here one time, and I had my backpack in my car, and it had all those papers in my backpack. So my idea when I first signed up, which was to have a friend of mine use her address as my place to grow, so that she could have a few plants, and if the cops ever busted her, she could say, well, I'm growing for Neil, and that's the address, and she'd be good. That was my plan, going to help protect my friend. Then I have my car stolen with my backpack with the paperwork in it. Now I'm calling my friend saying, oh my God, some unscrupulous people have possession of the information of your address as a place that I'm growing at. So, you could have the house cased and broken into. Never happened, thank goodness. And actually got my car back 2 weeks later. They found it out in Langley. And, most of my good stuff was gone. And I actually broke up with my girlfriend the day before I had my car stolen. And I moved all of my stuff into my car, and that's what was stolen, was all of my stuff in my car. So all my good stuff was gone, but they had taken the stuff that I had in my backpack and threw it on the floor so they could load my backpack up with my tools and other stuff that they wanted. And there on the floor of my car was my paperwork for the stuff. So, but that went from being, here's a good idea, I'll protect my friend, to, oh my God, I've now exposed my friend to some real risk here. And the whole system, I don't like it, never have liked it. I'm glad we have something, and I'm glad we've been able to build on that to a degree. But I still think it's such discrimination compared to what other people, wanted to use.
Unfortunately, history is repeating itself. With booze, we gave local governments these powers, and we had wet areas and dry areas, and it's a major problem.
Local dry locations,
local governments are a problem. And they are the ones who are holding up all of these, dispensaries and other things, and some of them on a ridiculous basis. We want to see what happens. Well, where have you been for the last 20 at least, and many more years?
I learned this back in 2006 on the Freedom Tour when I was going across Canada and visiting municipality after municipality, and finding out that every one of them had a whole bunch of different bylaws from the other one you just came out of. You really have no idea what those bylaws are. It's not like it's posted on a big sign as you enter the town, and they can seemingly do whatever they want.
They're limited to jurisdiction too, but it's pretty broad.
But that seems to be. We found out that they can do really good things for us in wanting medical cannabis, because they can license low barrier access, and specifically to address the opioid crisis, which means high-dose edibles. So that's outside of the Cannabis Act, unless, like you say, we can get a license to be medical providers. But cities can do that. That's what we learned. And that's what they did back with the China White overdose crisis back in the late 90s. Was cities went ahead and licensed a supervised injection site before they had approval from Ottawa, which is in contravention of the criminal code, contravention of federal policy. Yet cities can do that. They can also not go along with what the federal government says. They can decide no growing of cannabis in our municipalities, no dispensaries in our municipality. They can do these things.
Well, they can't. They can and they can't. The thing is, they don't have any criminal law power, so they can't prohibit. And sometimes they try to prohibit. And we've been able to go to court and say you're exercising criminal law.
Is that what the case was about with the dispensaries?
I think that case involved licenses of massage parlors. I think was that one. So they had to regulate massage parlors. They couldn't prohibit them, but they can use their zoning powers to zone, and sometimes the zoning is such that Like there's nowhere you can do it, which then
Or
tantamount to
licensing
prohibition.
fees. Or their licensing
Or licensing is the other one.
Yeah.
So licensing and zoning are huge local government powers.
Yeah.
And you know the cost of the license. The Compassion Clubs was $1,000. The dispensaries $30,000. As an example of a huge disparity.
Well, and I wouldn't even compare those two. I mean, I would compare a drugstore. Was a drugstore about $175 for a single pharmacy?
Yeah, I don't know, but
I mean, there's nothing that comes close to the $15,000 for the P&E.
It's all about this continued stigma. Right. Fake news. If there ever was a fake news, you go back to Zimmer and Morgan's book, Marijuana Myths, Marijuana Facts, and just read the summaries of all the Royal Commissions of inquiry going back to 1894, not to mention all the ones in Canada, that have over and over and over again said, where's the problem here? And then, you go online to PubMed, and that's what the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine did. They surveyed 10,500 of the 20,000 studies that are out there on PubMed, that are usually bigger cohorts than most of the pharmaceutical studies, and, involving more people and so on. And that's where they said, sure, there's all these problems with the research because of the law, but notwithstanding that, there's conclusive evidence that it's effective for chronic pain. And that's what the oxys have been given. That's what the opiate crisis is all about.
Daryl Pleckus in 2005 was debating Norm Stamper from LEAP at the Fraser Valley University, where Daryl Pleckus was a professor there. And he was on the payroll of the RCMP, and he was their big spokesperson about prohibition. And I remember, he lost that debate so handily. Norm Stamper just wiped the floor with him. Yeah. And I remember that towards the end of it, he said, well, let's just not be hasty. The jury's still out about whether or not cannabis is actually good for medical purposes. But he conceded at that time. He said, if it's true that cannabis is actually helping people with their medical conditions, well, then absolutely it shouldn't be a criminal offense to possess it, and we need to rethink everything. Well, I yelled out from the camera, let's just keep arresting people till we're sure, eh? But, certainly by now, the evidence is very clear that, I don't even think they were very aware of the endocannabinoid system back in 2005.
Well, and they still don't teach it to the doctors, which is a big problem. But so, the information we've been able to get, the evidence we've been able to get before the public over the last even 10 years, but maybe go back 20, is huge compared to the information that we had before. And the medical information has clearly turned the minds of large numbers of people. Yeah. And a very interesting one currently is us senior citizens. There are now CBD. More and more senior citizens who may have experienced it in the 60s, who knows, but who are saying, well, if I can get off these drugs that I have to keep doing, that are giving me these side effects, if I can just get some homeostasis, some balance, so that my inflammation or other things are being modulated,
which is the role of the endocannabinoid system.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I want.
Yeah, of course.
And, senior citizens should be able to access cannabis. I'm going to have to debate this with somebody at an elders conference. I say they should have it in there. Smoking and smell is always going to be an issue, and you don't want to impact your neighbors negatively. You want to have them support you. So you need to create a space where people can go and smoke if they want to smoke. Some people need rapid onset. You need to make sure you control the smells and so on if you're going to do it. But edibles, vaping,
people barbecue. There's lots of smells in our society. But within reason, try not to stigmatize the users too much.
No. It's all about being reasonable and taking into account your neighbor. That's fundamental basic stuff. Yeah. So it's maybe for enhanced sexual purposes.
You heard
people talk about the impact of cannabis to make you feel good or to revive your interest or whatever. As people get older, they're going to start maybe losing some of that. So isn't that even a good enough argument to enable them to use it in their homes.
Is a good enough argument. All of them together, it's overwhelming.
So
you heard Paul Lewin talk about people's lack of access and how there's no other substance that's like that. I mean, there's nothing that you have to go through that rigmarole to get access to something.
Well, other prescribed.
And now here you are, bringing a challenge against the government to allow for better access and high dose edibles for people, and you're going to be in a courtroom with lawyers paid for by tax dollars on behalf of the government fighting you on that. I watched that, through this recent case here against the city of Vancouver. Tax dollars involved in fighting hard to prevent sick people from getting access to something that helps them with no justification. There's no societal issues of any magnitude that would justify that. What's going on? Why are they fighting against having proper access to medical cannabis? Is it really corruption?
It's a complicated situation because you've got the Department of Justice that's been there, the lawyers have been there, maybe some of them since the Pierre Trudeau era, probably not that long, but I was there then.
You're just coming out of retirement also, aren't you?
So you've got people who've been through various different governments, Liberal, Conservative, Joe Clark, Paul Martin, etc., and they've been there that whole time, and they're not necessarily a Liberal or Conservative themselves, but they get a file and they're a lawyer and they're instructed. But it is the Minister of Justice or somebody in that department who's instructing the lawyer to appeal or whatever. And
spend the money.
I think it's a legitimate question. I'm involved in not just cannabis cases. We've got the class action from the Kent riot going back over 10 years, which now suddenly they're talking about settling after they appeal every little issue. Right. The loss of accelerated parole that the Harper government retroactively took away from people. Right. We're still fighting that, and they appeal every issue. The other day, they appealed one of the Aboriginal caregiver cases. And so you say, we don't want Mr. Harper or anybody like him back that's going to introduce mandatory minimums for growing 6 plants and, all of this stuff. We don't want them back. But what's your problem? Why haven't you been undoing all of these things that the Harper government did and doing them quickly? And why are you appealing things that we have established violated constitutional rights? Why are you appealing them? To
me,
so we're in this very awkward situation where the Green Party is the only party that supports decriminalizing all drugs and seems to have a good platform, but we don't want it to cause the situation where we're splitting the vote and the Conservatives get in. So we're put in this ridiculous situation.
And the whole justice system is so inaccessible to most people. It's so expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, your services are very expensive because it's expensive for what you do. I mean, I know that you're paid well because you've had to gain the knowledge it takes to be able to navigate the justice system, which is very, very difficult. But the fees that you're charged, the paperwork that you have to duplicate and triplicate and all of that, it's prohibitive. To me, it's on purpose, trying to keep people from being able to pursue justice.
But I mean, that's why, when I was a young lawyer at law school in the 70s, that's when people like Mike Harcourt, who was there at the time, Dave Robertson, other people that maybe aren't as well known, came up with creating the Legal Aid Society. And providing, lawyers only used to do there was only the pro bono before that and nothing else.
Right.
And so we created the Legal Aid Society, then the Legal Services Society, and we've had all these battles. They haven't increased the rates.
Funded.
They haven't increased the rates for 25 years.
Why wouldn't
and
they
so you've got these
fund
lawyers
that?
who like doing the work.
It's facing jail time, and a lot of times you're facing financial ruin. You end up facing jail time.
It's
ridiculous. Your family is at risk.
Yeah. So that's the criminal law thing of trying to make sure people who are charged with offenses are covered, and it's inadequate and really needs major fixing.
Yeah.
And then there's the civil law, and most of the civil cases, you're acting for a plaintiff, so a lot of them is on a percentage. So the lawyers are financing the lawsuits.
Right.
Law societies aren't too happy with some of that.
You're anticipating a win at the end, and then
but it's based on that,
right?
And or otherwise, you're paying an hourly rate depending upon the lawyer's experience and so on and so forth. So one of the things that we discovered, and Matthew Jackson, I give great credit for, was getting costs in public interest cases. So in Allard, for example, the judge agreed that this was a public interest case. So you're not going to get it in any run-of-the-mill case, but if you're taking a public interest case, he gave us substantial indemnity costs, which, normally when you get costs, it's maybe a quarter of what it's actually cost. This was 80% of what it costs, which, was sort of, we weren't expecting it when we said, we're going to take this case pro bono, and if we get costs, great.
Yeah, you had a lot of billable hours that you didn't put in for, that was a long case.
But I mean, so people hopefully learn from that if you've got a public interest case, do an assessment of that, because you might be able to get paid,
And that is what you're pursuing at this point as well, right?
That's the way we're doing it. I mean, I am semi-retired. I haven't been taking on like run-of-the-mill regular cases that people charge. I'm referring them to people like Jack and so on, Matthew, if it's civil stuff, and other lawyers that I know, depending upon where it's happening. But I'm still involved in the dispensary issue and the extracts issue, and I'm doing cannabis consulting. With all kinds of amazing things that come out of the woodwork now, that things are moving at least in that direction. Just amazing sorts of inventions.
So you also represent LPs?
I don't actually represent an LP specifically, but I'm trying to get, for example, craft growers to become LPs, so that, I am hooked in with a company that is hoping to put together made-to-measure micro units, so that craft growers in the Kootenays and elsewhere can, instead of having to get their barn or their basement or whatever they may have been growing for medical purposes or whatever, being approved by government or whatever, they can take their genetics and do it in this space, hopefully nearby, that is made to measure. So when they're going through the Health Canada process, they've got their building and everything there, they're just going to rent it. There's others coming up with these containers and the refrigerator reefer unit containers, and putting them together in different ways, because they've been used to have vegetables and plants and so on in them. And so there's people trying to put that together to facilitate. So the whole idea is, we've got all these craft growers out there. Up in the Kootenays, you've got 2,000 craft growers identified, and they've now funded, the Community Futures have a business transition officer, Shannon Ross, who is, her job is to help bring in the craft growers into the system. And we know that's the quality product that's out there, that's been there for years, that we need to help bring these people in. And, I keep saying, what did we do with the Bronfmans and the Seagrams and the Kennedys? We rolled them all in. Yeah. The big mistake I think the federal government has made, and it's because of a police, I think, security attitude that's come along, is that, they've said, if you were seen at Kitts Beach and somebody complained about the smell of marijuana 10 years ago, so we think you're going to divert and not give you security clearance. Or, you were in a car with somebody we think was organized crime. It didn't matter that you was on the same soccer team and you didn't happen to know anything about the person's background. You were just getting a ride. Things like that are preventing people from getting into the system. People who've been running dispensaries already. I'm saying, listen, you roll everybody in, and then you've given them a license. They know it's like being on parole. You've done your time. Let's get moving. Let's move. Second chance in the U.S.
We got to get away from the prohibition pricing, though. It's insane.
Under our system, pricing is effective supply and demand usually, right? So if we can get the craft growers and everybody in, we know they're producing for far less than the LPs. That's why people are staying with them. If the pricing went
down, then they would have a chance of competing with the underground market. But at this point, they're over $10 a gram, and the craft stuff that they're coming up with is way more than that, like $18, $20 a gram. I saw $100 for an eighth. Yeah. From a Whistler government store. That's not going to fly. Nobody's going to be paying that for. Maybe some rich people that don't care, I don't know, but probably not them either. It's a failed model. They can't they can't maintain prohibition prices in a legal world and expect the underground market to disappear. It's just not going to happen.
And you know, they can't produce it seems they can't produce a good product in these huge greenhouses.
Well,
and
yeah,
things.
it loses some of its soul when it's on that scale, but it's also a corporatization of the weed, and there's so many different chemicals they're allowed to use on the weed that we don't agree with.
Yeah.
I know that I saw one of the testing things. Ramo had this where they're testing for all these different chemicals to make sure that there's not this or that.
Yeah.
And I said to Sandra, well, that's insane. Like, you know, cannabis is not dangerous. I mean, there's billions of doses of cannabis being consumed long before legalization. We didn't have any issues with it. And she said, well, you know, there's a couple of those on there that they really think are carcinogenic and you know, would need to be flushed properly or not used at all. And I said, well, that's fine. I mean, you could, you know, let growers understand not to use those few things.
It's
but
complicated.
I want to see a world where somebody can grow a couple pounds of weed in whatever facility they want and bring it down to a local place and a dispensary and have it tested. And the testing should
What
be
do we do with
relatively simple and
vegetables?
cheap.
We get vegetables from the farm. You know, if you take them home, you wash them and you cook with them.
They're creating a problem where there is none.
Yeah.
You know, they're
I think
playing the
it's
what if
over,
game. Well,
it's
what if
over,
this?
if it's overblown, but you know, you got to remember, it's one thing to have been able to do all sorts of things and whatever you wanted in this illicit market for as long as possible. It's another then to make it legal, in which case you are bringing in rules and regulations. And particularly if you're saying this product is good for medical purposes, you're going to up another notch of, and
I
so
think they're
that's going to
maintaining
be
the
there.
stigma.
But you know, we have the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia, for example, that I think lists all the stuff about the cannabis plant and deals with all the herbicides and pesticide issues and is there to guide people in terms of, you know, what's there. What more do you need?
shouldn't
So
be
you're
rocket
right.
science.
Bring it down, have it tested, sure.
Should be
But
easy.
let's go, you know. I mean, that's why the micro thing is a concern, because it's really, they could have just said, well, a DG, a designated grower, can grow for more than 2 people, which is we tried to establish in the earlier cases.
Yeah.
You know, boom, we would have had people growing for 50 people, and they'd have had less grow-ups and all the rest of it, but they couldn't get through their heads what they were doing. So, you know, anyway, we're heading in the right direction. We got a lot of
We're unfortunately getting there slowly, but it's a process.
It's a slow process.
It is.
The courts have been the charter. The charter has really been, you know, people, I don't know if they really understand. You know, they talk about Canadian values and so on and so forth. And I say, Canadian values, read the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's not just a citizen. There's a few there that are specific to citizens, such as the right to vote. But it's about, if you're present in Canada, this is what we say the relationship is between the government of all levels and the citizen, or the person, I should say, not the citizen. And so we have these fundamental values. And unlike most other constitutions, we have that balancing of the reasonable limits and the onus being on the government to justify the reasonable limit. If they want to limit freedom of association. Most, you know, the American Constitution doesn't have that. And we have a remedies clause. If your rights are violated, you have a right to an appropriate and just remedy. So this was a modern constitution where we benefited from the problems of court straining interpretations in other countries. So we have a very good charter. And our Supreme Court of Canada has been huge in terms of interpreting it in a broad and purposive manner. So
Well,
I
we
think,
need
no
that.
matter what happens, we always have that and the independent courts in order to protect us or help advance what we're trying to do.
I think we still have a long way to go with the courts in interpreting that document properly, because right now there's still so many abuses in this. For our public servants to be restricting access to a plant, I think there needs to be some serious justification for that. That we are natural beings on a planet here, and that's a plant that grows here
but
with
they're
a
now
huge
only-
history of medicinal uses.
They're not
Thousands of
restricting
years.
your access anymore,
Well,
only up
sure
to
they
a
are.
certain point. They're
Well, up to a
allowing you
certain point.
access and restricting you from
I
having
mean,
more.
I think even the
which is
pricing
a
is
different
restricting access to make it as expensive as it is.
affordability. Yeah.
Because most of the people that are using cannabis for anything to do with non-recreational, and even recreational is a subset of medicine, it's preventative medicine, but something that's more on a daily, ongoing basis, very difficult to afford the prices at these these government stores if you've got a daily habit or a daily need for cannabis.
Yeah.
So I think that, and you know, I don't think it's the role of government to interfere with commerce and to stifle commerce the way that they have, to impose huge licensing fees, to decide for whatever reason that's not to do with anything that they can justify because of hospital beds full of people or actual harm or cost, that they just don't like this particular, they don't like us as pot activists, they don't like that we've continued to defy their laws and rules, and so, okay, you win, people can have cannabis, but they have to get it off of us, and you're not going to be allowed to sell any of it, and if you got cannabis that you didn't get off of us, well, you're still going to be a criminal. You know, it's about what's right and wrong, is for me.
Unfortunately, tobacco as the predecessor resulted in all of these laws to do with tobacco. And they've taken a lot of them and just lumped them in on cannabis, unjustifiably. And the same with alcohol. We've got all these laws.
It's up to guys like you
instead of
to take this before some reasoned adjudicator and argue the case and have him agree and change the law. And then even then they don't change the law lots of times, even though the judge says so, it seems.
Well,
so I don't know.
They do, but
it's frustrating. It's frustrating from a lay citizen's point of view. The cost of accessing the courts, the time it takes to get the courts to decide, and for a long time, even the decisions the courts came up with, which we didn't think were right. Although I must say that thanks to yourself and the efforts of other lawyers on our behalf, we've had some pretty good court decisions. You know, with the Barron and the Concentrates case and the Allard case, and more to come.
The charter was a big part of helping us
enable
us to do a lot of these things, which we couldn't do before. You know, finally we could hold the federal government or the provincial governments or local governments accountable to some basic constitutional status.
And you know, in a system where we elect into these positions of influence these people, you would think we would have better checks and balances.
Well, part of the problem, I think, is that when it is a controversial issue, they like to duck and let us do it in the courts.
And delay.
Because the court,
delay.
Although waiting for them to do it would take even longer.
Of
so,
course.
you know, in a way it's good. But I mean, it is a way for politicians to toss the ball and let the court make that unpopular decision, or they think it'll be unpopular. In the cannabis thing, it's usually very popular. But anyway,
Yeah.
So, you know, we'll see how it all continues to unfold. You've
I
got
think there
some
was a
good
group
young
of people that
lawyers like
jumped up
Jack.
and down and went yay when the government decided to legislate out of business the medical cannabis dispensaries, but it wasn't a lot of people.
Yeah.
There was a lot of people that were crying about that, and I meet those people all the time, and they ask me, you know, where am I going to find, where can I find these things? And I have to say, well, online, I guess, is the best way.
Yeah,
but
well,
kind of
and yet that too runs
I don't
against
read LPs online.
No, but it runs against the patient who wants to come and look at the product and smell the product and maybe talk to other patients who have experienced it as to whether it's helped them or not, which happens at compassion clubs, right? And so again, getting it online, legally or illegally, from an LP or otherwise, means waiting to get it, opening the package, seeing if it's okay, and if it isn't, another delay in getting it. And that's the fundamental problem with that system. And so we say, well, in the short term, we can hopefully get the Compassion Club thing with the license to sell, and that's one way to. But it's not the solution. It's
John,
not
what
that,
we're doing here is
we're
going to open places here. We've had numerous meetings with some of the players involved, other dispensary owners, and because the city has passed this motion, they passed the motion with some amendments. I didn't really brief you properly on that. The motion was to address the exclusion zone that was put in by Robertson's council from here to Dana's store, all through the Hastings corridor. There was going to be no dispensing of cannabis allowed because Health Canada said it was, or the Coastal Health said it was a vulnerable population. Other stupid excuses. So this time around, thanks to the efforts of Sarah Bly with the High Hopes Foundation and with what we've been doing with the Cannabis Substitution Project, that pushed City Hall into coming up with a motion to revisit that exclusion zone to allow cannabis to be dispensed in that area and to allow cannabis to be dispensed low barrier access specifically for the opioid crisis. Originally, they were to have conversations with the VPD, Coastal Health, and the BC Liquor Cannabis Control Board to decide what model of distribution would be involved. But because of Marion at Van Du coming and presenting to them and talking about how there needs to be nothing about us without us, and that's the mantra of Van Du, that there was amendment put forth where they need to also have conversations with CSP, Van Du, people who use drugs as part of this. And we're of course going to not ever settle for not having high dose edibles and low cost, good quality flowers, low barrier, meaning no doctor needs to be on board. This is for people using opioids in our society. They need to be able to walk discreetly into a storefront, pick up some high dose cannabis edibles and go back out.
With no doctor approval.
Without doctor's approval, because that's too much of a barrier for people, for many of the people that are going to die in their homes because they're not going to go to their doctor and they're not going to tell their doctor that they're using these opiates from the street. But you should
be able to have a doctor right on site.
We should, yes, and we want to have that. And we've got actually Dr. Shawarma from the Green Cross is a big part of the one that I'm actively involved with right now. We're also going to open an Indigenous healing lounge, a consumption lounge, as part of the dispensary. We're going to dispense from that dispensary for the CSP as well, where people will get free edibles, free care packs, but they're going to have to register and qualify for low financial or facing financial barriers to get that. And then we're going to trade those cannabis edibles for information. They're going to have to fill out ongoing surveys of how it's working for them, what it's doing for them, how much they're using, that sort of thing. But we're prepared to open up as soon as we can find the right place to rent right now. There's people running around the area meeting with real estate people to do that right away.
Very important that you continue to try to do all of the things that you can to get legal permissions and so on and so forth, to show that you're exercising your peaceful remedies to try and accomplish the result. Because there was this earlier discussion about the defense of necessity, and the defense of necessity is when the evil you commit is a lesser evil to the evil that would occur if you don't commit it. I raised that argument in the Steinhauser hostage-taking trial at the BC Pen back in 1977, where the prisoners, Andy Bruce, Dwight Lucas, and Claire Wilson, took 15 people hostage at the BC Pen because they were threatened with being put back in the hole. They had been in the hole for years, and they had been released as a result of the McCann case, where if you read that, you'll hear about prisoners talking about sparrows in their heads and you're in the cell next door.
It's
and
cruel and unusual punishment.
It was declared to be cruel and unusual, and that's more than 25 years ago.
Right. And a lot of changes happened as a result of that, right?
Well, we still had Ashley Smith. We still had recent decisions because of people committing suicide. The young man in Matsqui, who'd just been, it's still a major problem. I mean, right now there's all kinds of things going on to try and limit it and so on. But my point was simply to illustrate that here they were in court in McCann trying to declare it to be cruel and unusual, showing they were trying to exercise their peaceful remedies. And the guards were then agitating to put them back in the hole. So they took the hostages, including some people who were very sympathetic to them. And the evil that was clearly breaking the law, but they demanded everybody to be released from solitary in a flight to Cuba, and they were saying that the evil, the greater evil is cruel and unusual treatment or punishment.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the judge didn't instruct the jury on it was the Bill of Rights still then, not the Charter, as strongly as we wanted on the Bill of Rights part. But the interesting thing was the jury came back. And while they convicted of the one count, and I can't remember which one, before they could announce their verdict on the second count, the Crown jumped up and stayed the charge because he was so scared that they were going to say something about it. And I know they were going to say something because I later had people wanting to talk to me, and I had to say, I can't talk to you. I'm not allowed to talk to you. You have the juries, And so it was really quite interesting, and so that's the defense. And I mean, so I underscore: keep trying to do everything within your remedies and so on, because then you're
we learned we're going to have the city of Vancouver on board with us. We're going to do it.
That's excellent.
We're going to.
I need to know more about
the way
that.
It needs to be done.
I need to get a copy of that.
With that, I think I have that in my files.
Because if the city's supporting you, if we're going to include some opiate addicts, and I think it'll be easy to have them medically approved if they aren't already, That'll be a component of the seeking a declaration that the new regs are unconstitutional to the extent that they don't provide for these medically approved people who want a product that has no lethal dose in order to get them, and that is effective for chronic pain instead of opiates that aren't.
So we found out that the city will license when we get it right. When they decide that, yes,
Well,
what you're doing is right, we'll license it.
That's great.
But we also found out that just having a license from the city doesn't necessarily back off the CSU or the RCMP.
True.
But it does have some weight to it, and it would certainly have some weights in the court.
And the VPD. The VPD have been very reasonable
Yeah,
over
we're
all
not
the
too worried
years.
about
They're
the
the ones
VPD.
who learnt that taking people to the supervised injection site was a far wiser and better thing to do than busting them.
Yeah. No, I think
And
we have the
so
VPD
I
on board. I
think the
actually presented to
RCMP
them before I started the project. I went to their board,
Yeah.
told them all about what we were going to do at Vandu, and that's what we've been doing.
I think the
2 years
RCMP
and 8 months now. We've never had any VPD member there interfering in any way. I don't think that's the issue. The issue is the CSU.
Yeah.
This community safety unit that's very wrongly named. They're not
Yeah.
Protecting any communities by shutting down dispensaries.
Well, again-
but they're not asking city councils for permission to bust these dispensaries in their municipalities. They're
So
not
I
even
think
informing them.
you need to maybe the argument we're making for the compassion clubs is the same. You need to apply for a license to
Yeah.
sell medical cannabis.
I think that's the way we're going to have to go.
And then you can say to the CSU, we're applying for a federal license. This is not a provincial dispensary. We're not applying for a provincial dispensary. And this involves patients' constitutional rights. And so if you do bust us and shut us down, we will seek legal advice and seek an appropriate and just remedy for the violation of these people's constitutional rights.
I think that's how we're going to go, and I think we're going to probably win it.
Hopefully, the communication I've had with them has not been unreasonable, and so my hope is that Health Canada sees that this is a thing to do.
Right.
They've approved an ex-police officer. I saw an article. There's an ex-police officer who's got a license to sell medical cannabis.
Right.
I forget his name, but so let's get moving and get medical approved patients sorted out.
Agreed. Thank you so much, John, for taking the time today. It's such a privilege to have you here, and I think it's so valuable, the information that you've passed on to our audience. We've got a long way to go yet in winning this, and you're a big part of how we do that, and we need these legal guides to help us do that. So,
well, I'm getting old, and I've got Jack Lloyd is the young guy, and we've got Matthew Jackson, another young guy. So we've got some really good people, and there's other lawyers around too that helped us out in the Allard case. Tanya Grace in Abbotsford helped. There's a whole bunch. Not huge numbers.
You still got a great passion for it, John. You can't completely retire from this because you care.
I'm never going to be fully retired.
I'd recommend it. As we get old, you just do the tasks that you enjoy.
Well,
do the parts that you're inspired for. Let Jack and Matthew handle the other sides.
Happy to help and come and argue and all the rest of it.
You still got a passion. So,
I just don't want to have to do the paperwork anymore.
Well, that's what I mean. Pass that on to them. You do what really inspires you, because you're a great mind and a great heart that we've had the privilege of having on our side for a long time. You've won so many battles for us that I don't know where we'd be without you, but we wouldn't be where we are. And we've come a long way. We're not there yet, but we've come a long way, and I got to thank you so much for that. So, and thanks again for coming on my show. Hopefully we can have you on again a little bit later when we can talk about winning some of these battles in the court. Do you have any timeline on when you're going to be presenting these arguments?
Well, we were hoping to maybe see some of the opiate folks today, but it was they have their regular meeting over there every Tuesday, and so I had a good chat with one of the people. I don't know if she wants me to mention her name. And I had
Deb Hay, I'm sure she does.
Oh, okay. Well, that's great. She's been really helpful, and we had a really good chat. And she, we've got this list from you and her, and we'll go through it and try and pick the best ones that we.
How many are you looking for?
Well, we usually, in Allard, we only had 4 to 6 people.
Sure, I'm sure that list that I got.
We tried to pick them in the different categories.
There's a half a dozen that are going to be just stellar.
Well, that, you know, I mean, is there stellar? We want to get it in front of the court. We don't want to overdo it, but because we've also got women with children who need high-end extracts for the diseases and problems, medical ailments their kids have, and who can't get it or have to try and get a 140 exemption or whatever. So there's the opiate addicts, and there's medical patients and their children or who are medical patients that also require it. And
so where does abuse of power come in? Like, it looks to me like our government is really abusing their power in trying to prevent people from accessing something that is of very little significance. Why would they be doing that? And
I mean, they will say, well, we're not preventing. We, you know, previous governments were preventing. We're trying to move it forward and provide.
All right,
and
let's make them do that then.
That's why we've done this, and we're still getting criticized for it. But we've got to move forward. But there's still, you know, that doesn't mean they shouldn't be criticized and their feet shouldn't be held to the fire for especially the medical end of it, and not doing things properly in the medical.
In a lot of cases, they say, well, you guys won, but they're sure not acting like it. You know, they're not acting like we won. And I don't feel like we won. When I feel like we won, I'm going to cry. I'm going to literally have tears rolling down my cheeks.
We have won to a certain extent.
Sure, we've come a long way. I've seen it. I've been here for a long time fighting this battle. I've seen how far we've come. We have come a long way. Yeah. It's not quite cry-worthy yet, but you know, won't be too long.
I mean, it's going to take time, and but I don't think there's any turning back. I certainly don't want the Conservatives in, because I think they'll make it more complicated going forward.
Won't be long when I find out, eh?
You know, and especially with the medical, don't forget, it involves constitutional rights.
I'm really hoping for a minority government. It's the best we can do. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, Neil.
I'll think of a whole bunch more questions. I could have you here for a long time. We could a lot of things we could talk about still. But I try to keep the shows within 2 hours. This one's a little longer than that, but for real good reason. Extremely informative, and I think that we need to thank you a lot for what you've done and what you're continuing to do. Even though we pay you a lot of money for it, I'm sure, but you know, it takes heart and soul.
I did mostly legal aid in the early days.
Yeah, you did
Allard, as I say, Allard. It was like winning the lottery. You know.
There you go. Well, you had it coming. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And we'll check in later at some point with what the updates are to these things and see how we fare in the courts. Coming up soon.
The important thing is we got the money from the federal government to pay for the kid.
Very cool. All right. Thank you. So, CSP. The CSP.
And here we got the Holy Rollers doing their good job, making nice big joints. Look really big.
A little glimpse of the CSP there. Sunday we had a documentary film crew come in and do some filming of what we're doing there. There are still big changes coming, but we can't really announce them yet. I am in negotiations with people to partner with newly opening medical dispensaries coming up in response to the city's motion to allow for the dispensing of cannabis for the opioid crisis. And so I'm very excited about all of that, but I can't quite announce it yet because we don't have our location and we haven't decided on a few different things. But there are good things coming for the CSP down the road. We had another great day there the past week, or great 2 days, I guess, because I do this show once a week and I do the CSP twice a week. We had 2 great events of giving out cannabis to people. Every one of them is epic for sure. So many people to thank. I'm not going to go through it right now. We're a little short on time. But the CSP continues to keep people alive and satisfy the need for access to high-dose cannabis edibles in a very limited form. We give it out to people that are willing to line up for a few hours to get it, and we give it out in care packs that have several different things in them, but not as much as what people probably really need, and we're not doing as much as we could yet. So I'm going to be looking forward to changes in the future where we're partnering with dispensaries and available for people 5 or 6 days a week instead of just 2 days a week. So look for those changes coming up around the corners. We, as always, have our low dose and our high dose and our CBD from Twisted Extracts. I love Twisted Extracts. Our full-on 80 milligram THC. These things help people so dramatically. They should absolutely be supported by government agencies that want to help the people in distress, because it is a real benefit to them. We have just a few upcoming events that I'm aware of. There may be more, but they're not. I haven't been told about them. I think Cheech and Chong are still on the road doing their comedy routines. Check out them for schedules and places. The Saskatoon Prairie Harvest Medicinal Cup is coming up in November 8th, 9th, and 10th in Saskatoon. That's the Friendly Cup. Been going on for a number of years now, where a number of the great activists and suppliers of cannabis get together and share a wonderful weekend. During that same time, in the Kootenays, we've got Halloween, which is an event you can look into up there. They're going to have all sorts of craft cannabis available and vendors and things like that. And it's sort of a membership situation where there's a nominal fee to become a member when you arrive, and then you're in there as a member. So that's coming up as well. Other than that, we have our pot TV shows all week long. Carly Marley on Monday with BC Bud Gal and the 420 Lifestyle Show. Tuesdays, like today, is the slot for THC with Neil, which you've just watched, hopefully. And on Wednesday, we've got it From Under the Influence with Greg Williams and his co-hosts. And I know Greg was having fun today with the end of a pencil instead of a joint in some of the LP government stores. And I love the way Greg handles those kind of things. He's a very funny, a very smart man. So check out his show. And then on Fridays, it's Jeremiah Vandermeer with the Cannabis News Live. And his rotating co-hosts, Cookie's probably there, and Johnny B's there lots of times. And they'll get you up to speed on what's new in the cannabis world. And on Saturdays, it's Boss Lissa with High Noon. What do we got, John? Come on over here and say hi to me for a minute.
Hey, buddy.
This was the medicinal cannabis dispensary on Hastings that has turned into the Get Your Street Drugs Analyzed store. And they're doing a wonderful job of testing things, so we'll give them a little plug there as well. You can still see the medicinal cannabis dispensary is still active on Thurlow Street, and they still have high-dose cannabis edibles and non-LP weed for you there. So there's no other shows. We've covered it all. I want to thank my guests today, John Conroy, especially for coming in and giving us so much of his time and his insights into things, to Glenn Wills from CannaMatch.ca for helping us out with the 420 session, Jerry Martin for coming in for the Martin Medical Moment, and for Neil, my producer extraordinaire, doesn't get enough thanks on the show. He makes it look professional and makes me look as good as you can, which, it's a work in progress. Thanks to all of you for watching. Much appreciated that you help me get the message out as we try to change the things that aren't right in our world and get these public servants to recognize what their roles are supposed to be. So go in peace and have as much fun as you can changing the world. We'll see you next week.
Hi there, welcome to the 420 Lifestyle Show. I'm Carly Marley. She's taking a dab. Thanks.
We can play the Sickamoose video.
Oh yes, Sickamoose video. Let's play the Sickamoose video. any bigger